Hello and welcome back to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High-Performing Women. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swenson-Ridley, and I'm really excited for today's conversation. I am joined by Dr. Emily Kirkwold, who is a pharmacist and natural family planning educator who works for you, helps people honor their body's natural functioning to get to the root cause of their symptoms, and also not have to take things like birth control in order to plan a family for when you want a family. So, Dr. Emily, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm excited too. I was sharing with you before we started recording that my son is the product of not understanding natural family planning very well. I took it on and had a baby. And so, I know there's a lot of stigma out there around like that it doesn't work and, all of these things that you have to go on birth control or use an IUD. And I get these questions a lot in my chiropractic practice as well as from the women that I coach. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation. But, before we do, maybe I'm curious, how you got into doing this, especially coming from a pharmacy background.
Yeah. My passion for natural family planning really came out of a place of frustration. So it wasn't until I had struggled trying to conceive my daughter, tried, and it wasn't until I actually was able to get pregnant with her that my doctor said to me, well, birth control might have contributed to the delay in fertility. And at that moment when she said that, I just knew intuitively that I could never put these synthetic hormones in my body again. And I needed to figure out another way. I was happy to be pregnant, but I also knew I wasn't ready to have number 3 right after. And so I just dove into figuring out what is natural family planning. And I found a natural family planning instructor, and natural family planning literally changed my life. It changed my relationship with myself, knowing myself better and my body better. It changed my marriage. The communication that we have is amazing compared to what we had before. And it just, really gave me this self-confidence. And I just knew that I needed to get the message out there.
Awesome. I love that. And you brought up quite a few things. I think the most important and probably where a lot of women struggle with natural family planning is it really requires like starting to understand yourself on a level that maybe you haven't before, because a lot of the things that surround our cycle and how to know when you're ovulating, like I feel like that's stuff that's not talked about much in just like general conversation, right, or taught to us. So maybe we can start there with just diving in, like how do you start developing that relationship with yourself to be successful with either conceiving or not conceiving using natural methods?
Yeah, it really starts with knowing what are your body's natural signs of fertility. And you're right, these are things that are not talked about. I am a pharmacist. I went to graduate school. I have a doctorate. I went through all this medical training, and still we never talked about what are a woman's natural signs of ovulation. But your body does give you signs to let you know where you're at in your cycle and to identify the point of ovulation. So that's where I start. So there are multiple different signs of ovulation that your body gives you. The one sign that has been studied the most, and almost every natural family planning or fertility awareness method uses, is cervical mucus or cervical fluid. So this is a normal fluid that your cervix produces as your estrogen level rises during your cycle. And all you do to pay attention to this sign is every time you use the bathroom, when you wipe, instead of just throwing the toilet tissue away, you pay attention to what's there. Is there any fluid present, and what does it look like? What does it feel like? And from there, if you start keeping track of this every day, you'll notice how your mucus patterns will change, and you'll notice that at the time of ovulation, there is this clear change to this mucus that becomes very clear in color, very stretchy, or very wet or slippery feeling. So that's one main natural sign that women can pay attention to. Another sign would be basal body temperature or resting body temperature. So our normal body temperature at rest does change throughout the cycle, and this sign is especially helpful as an add-on sign to one of the other signs to help confirm that ovulation did happen. So when women are paying attention to their body temperature daily, you will see a rise in the body temperature after ovulation happens, and that can confirm that, yes, I did ovulate this cycle. So it's helpful if you want to use it in combination with the cervical mucus monitoring, for example. Another option for women who like that objective data, and is a method that I teach, is checking hormone levels with a simple at-home urine test. So there is technology, there's devices where you can check levels of your estrogen and luteinizing hormone, which are a couple of main hormones that are helpful in the fertility process. And you can get a reading of low, high, or peak fertility and know where you're at in your cycle based on reaching levels of these hormones. And then you can use that in combination of one of the other signs too. So, part of the key to being successful with using natural family planning or fertility awareness methods is asking yourself, what sign would make sense for me and my lifestyle, and what would make sense for me to keep track of every day, because really keeping track of something every day is going to help you, is the key to success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, so like a lot of the things we're talking about are things I've done or tried myself and talked with other women about. But, if you're not someone who can just lay in bed in the morning to take your temperature like first thing in the morning, that might not be the best method for tracking. But you can, it's reassuring that there's other things you can look at in conjunction with that as well.
Yeah.
And so what I find encouraging about this, and maybe we can go into this conversation, is just, and you mentioned, birth control wreaks a lot of havoc on our hormones, and it's used for a lot more than just preventing pregnancy these days, which is frustrating, I know, for a lot of women that I then meet who are either trying to get pregnant or can't get pregnant, or have issues after the fact with that. Maybe for those who aren't familiar with this conversation, are you up to diving into, what are some of the more long-term issues that can come from prolonged birth control or IUDs, or, the shots like the Depo shot and some of the stuff that's out there
definitely
these days?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I like to tell people, just to put this conversation into context too, is if you think about it, birth control is the only medication that we prescribe to perfectly healthy women to shut down their body's natural functioning. Every other medication we use is to try to help fix a deficiency or help your body get back to the way it was supposed to work. But here we're stopping something that's normally supposed to be happening. So just putting that into context. But yeah, as far as long-term effects from being on hormonal contraceptives, there's more and more data coming out about this. I think some of the biggest and scariest to me data is on our mental health and the rates of depression that are tied to hormonal contraceptives. There's things like delayed fertility, and that research has shown it can take 9 to 12 months for your body to get back to a natural cycle after you're stopping birth control or taking an IUD out. I also work as a pharmacist at a hospital, and so unfortunately I do see some of those worst case scenarios for women on birth control too, where a young woman who's in her 20s with no other risk factor is in the ER with a blood clot in her lungs, and her risk factor is that she's on birth control. That's the only thing, that buildup of estrogen, and especially if you've been on it for years and years, you're at an increased risk of developing a clot. So those are some of the things that I think about.
So commonplace for us to have this fear around, and like so much of the Western medicine is fear driven, and I'm sure working in pharmacy, like you see this as well. Mm-hmm. But it's like we've developed this societal fear that if you don't take birth control or don't use one of those things to stop that, and you're not wanting to get pregnant, but married or sexually active or whatever it is, that like it's just not going to work.
Right.
That kind of, and so I'd love to have because I'm a little bit in this, like my husband and I, we have 4 boys and we don't want any more kids. He's older, he's 48 and I'm 36, but so we use condoms, and like just total transparency here, that works, that's great. Like some days I'm like, I'd rather not have to use a condom, but it's both of us getting that place of comfort of
mm-hmm.
Knowing we're not going to get pregnant without it.
Yeah.
So I think we can talk to like how do you start to shift this perception of, and like really just accept that you are capable of either getting pregnant or not getting pregnant, just following your body's signs and signals.
Yeah, that's such a great question, and thank you so much for sharing some of your story too. I definitely grew up with this message that like you better watch out, like a boy looks at you wrong and you might get pregnant. Like that's how you're made to feel. Like at any moment in time, you need to be on alert. But the science actually says that there are technically only 6 days every cycle that you can get pregnant. And that's because once your egg is released, it's only able to stick around. It's only viable for up to 24 hours. And then it's the 5 days before that, because sperm can live in this good quality cervical mucus for up to 5 days. So it's really a short window of time every cycle. Now, the only way to find out those exact 6 days would be to get a transvaginal ultrasound every single day, watch your follicle develop and rupture. That's not practical. But we have these natural family planning, fertility awareness methods that have science behind them, have research behind them that have shown that if you are following these certain signs and following these instructions for intimacy, that you can identify as close as possible to your specific 6-day window, your specific fertile window, then you can feel confident knowing these are the days I'm going to be intimate and these are the days I'm not, depending on what your family planning goals are.
That's really interesting. How long do you find it takes women to like figure that out? Are we talking like several months here to really like years? Because obviously I attempted it for like a month and got pregnant.
Sure.
Yeah.
After someone has a session with me where we sit down for an hour and go over, what are your fertility signs? How do you keep track of them? How to use this information for your intimacy? You have all the information that you need to be able to use it effectively. But I find it's generally after 3 months of tracking that couples feel confident in using it. And that those are women who are cycling regularly. If you're a woman who has been diagnosed with PCOS or something where you already have irregular cycles, then it might take a little bit longer, maybe up to 6 months, for you to really get a feel for what your cycles are like.
Awesome. And that's being off of birth control, right? Because birth
Correct.
control is messing with that.
Correct.
So, this conversation is for those like you're looking for another option, whether it's tuning into your own fertility before getting pregnant, or not wanting to, do something permanent, or to, take the things that are going to mess with you long term, as we've been talking about. So that's really interesting. And what's the success rate of the natural, like if you really embrace this in terms of like not getting pregnant?
Yeah.
So let's just keep the conversation
Yeah.
here. So I think that's more of my demographic in terms of listeners.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, to put it, how effective is it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to put it in context, birth control pills are reported to be 91% effective. So there are still women who conceive on birth control. Anecdotally, I know 2 women who have. And so then natural family planning methods, it does depend a little bit on the method that's used. You know, are they using cervical mucus? Are they using multiple signs? But in general, the efficacy rates for avoiding pregnancy are between 86 to 98% effective. So right in line with that about 90% effective as.
Yeah.
And that's
so
not just about, you know, I know in pharmacy school, it was very much like hormonal contraceptive is the only way to avoid pregnancy, and anything else is just guessing and taking a risk.
And when you're really listening to your body, you're not guessing, you're taking a risk.
Right.
you're tuned in.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think in the past, women had been told, oh, you're fertile on day 14 after your period, so all you have to do is, you know, look at the calendar and then you know. And that's just not accurate. Even in women who, you know, have 28-day cycles every cycle, their fertile window can vary from cycle to cycle. And so natural family planning really teaches you to be in tune with, what is my body telling me today? Am I in my fertile window or not? Using your actual information and not just guessing from past information.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an important point, because a lot of women are different. Like the number of women I've met who actually have a 28-day cycle is not that many.
Right.
You know, we're all unique and different and vary in our own ways. I know I tend to be like 25, and other people I know can be 30. Like it yeah, definitely. And it's all normal. So maybe we can shift gears a little bit, because there's a lot of, you know, I talk a lot about like how to empower ourselves as women, and this conversation is one of those. Like, we're taking ownership of something that I think was really taken from us in terms of, you know, being really in tune with our fertility and our bodies, and like, this is an enormous part of who we are. Like, whether you've chosen to have children or not, like, our bodies are kind of these flowing things through the month. So, you know, with that, like, I'm more just opening the door for discussion around this, because, you know, how do we take that control back? Like what do you see women do that brings our power back to just taking ownership of our own bodies? It's essentially what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think it's taking ownership of our bodies, but also taking the burden off, right? I know from my personal experience of going from taking birth control to using natural family planning, I felt a lot of pressure. I felt like I have to be sure I take my pill every day. Like, I have to be in charge of, are we getting pregnant or not? And now that we use natural family planning as a couple, like, we're talking about, are we intending to achieve a pregnancy or avoid a pregnancy? I'm telling my husband, no, I'm still paying attention to what my signs are, so that's part of my ownership. But then I'm communicating that, and we're talking together, okay, this is my sign for the day. This is what it means for our intimacy today. And so part of it is letting women know that they have the power to know this natural information about their body and use that information, but that all the pressure isn't on them.
I love that. And I can see how that would really change communication between husband and wife, just around, you know, around the conversation of intimacy in your marriage. And like that opens a whole new level of things. That's really cool to hear about. There was something else you said there that I thought was really powerful, just in connecting with ourselves in this way. It's just like, there's just always been such a stigma around our period and our cycle and our it's like this time of like I find in my marriage with my husband, like the one time I'm communicating with him about what's going on with me physically is like, hey, I have my period, I feel like death, and I'm probably going to be mean to you. And not like, and I work with a lot of women to get a lot of the symptoms under control, but sometimes mine show their heads,
Sure.
as they do for all of us.
Yeah.
But this is like taking it to where we can have positive conversations around how how we're feeling physically and emotionally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really important for us as women to recognize that it's perfectly normal for us to feel differently throughout your cycle. And so knowing when you have your period is helpful for that time, but there's so much more to our cycle than that. And so I find when you're using natural family planning, when you really know, oh, I'm in my estrogen phase, okay, this is how I usually feel then. When I'm at my ovulation time, like, wow, I feel like on top of the world, I can get things done. Like, I want to be romantic. Like, all these things are happening. And then, now I'm in my progesterone phase. Like, I want to take a step back now. And I'm in my menstrual phase. Like, I just need some rest time and some alone time and some chocolate. Like, and being in tune with that and knowing, like, it's okay for me to feel this way. And then if you have the luxury to be able to start, even in small ways, managing your life around that, right? So,
yeah,
knowing like if I feel the most outgoing during my ovulation time and my ovulation time is coming up in 2 weeks, like maybe I'm going to plan to hang out with friends that weekend, those kind of things.
Exactly. And I've talked about this on the show before too, because our energy flows, with our cycle. And that's essentially what you're talking about here. And so the more we can tune into that, and if you're doing natural family planning, or, even if you're at the age where you're not worrying about this so much, if you still have a cycle, like you can tune into this stuff and just know like, okay, like this time maybe I should do that hard workout, or I should take on that big project, or like make a big push in my business, whatever it is. And then there's the times where it's really okay to just sit on the couch with a cup of tea and a blanket and like do nothing. And we need that. Women used to go hang out in a tent during their cycle. And if you've read The Red Tent or heard of that, like,
right. Yeah.
And
just not putting pressure on ourselves then to feel like we have to be this amazing, productive person every single day. And it's not to say that we can't be, right? We're capable. Like we can feel like we need rest and still power through something. But the more that we can tune into, I was designed with this cyclical nature, and I can tune into that. I think it's helpful for your physical and your mental health.
Absolutely. And I remember the other thing I was going to ask you about was, because we were talking about, partners and communication with this, like how has choosing natural family planning, like how does it affect your husband? Does he have a role, like beyond just talking about it? And, obviously we're partners. So what does the partnership look like?
Yeah. Yeah, for us, when we first started learning how to chart my cycle, we used a paper chart. And so my instructor actually encouraged him to be the one to write in the paper chart. And that was really helpful, actually, to not just tell him like, oh, I'm having this kind of cervical mucus today, but to have him write it down, or to have him ask me, hey, what was your mucus like today? Like, you probably haven't had many of those conversations if this is something new to you, like, so that opens things up. And then the more that you do it together, then he can see like, oh, I noticed like you're having these mucus days, like it must mean that your ovulation time is getting close, or, so that's been a huge thing. And now we switched to an electronic version, but we use like the Google Sheets app, and so we share it on our phone. So I'm still putting this stuff in my chart, and it goes to him so he can still look, and he'll say to me like, oh, I saw this is happening today. And we're just really, really helps us be on the same page.
That's awesome. Very cool. So I know you teach natural family planning now. So where can women go to, learn more, connect with you, kind of take those first steps to, if this has been an intriguing conversation.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, definitely the best place to go is my website, which is nfppharmacist.com. I host a free workshop on what is the basics of natural family planning. You can find details there. And then I teach a class that goes more in depth, and I work one-on-one with women and couples.
awesome. And I will put all that in the show notes. And do you have any parting words of wisdom or encouragement for anybody who's dabbling and taking this on?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to encourage women again that our bodies were made to have cycles. And so, even if it just is starting out by paying attention to your period and what is your period like for you, not just that you're on your period, but how heavy is my bleeding? What is my color of my period blood like? How am I feeling? Just starting that and keeping track of that can help you start tracking into your cyclical nature.
Awesome. That's really good advice. I like that. Well, Dr. Emily, thank you so much for joining us and bringing this conversation and knowledge to the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.